Thanks, Concur. Just in relation to your earlier comment, if I may, I'd like to withdraw the term dishonest in favour of the term untrue. Not true.
It'd be preferable
not factually correct.
Well, that's
Will that do? Karen Corley, I propose to take questions 1 to 4 together. The Mulvey report, Dublin North East Inner City, Creating a Brighter Future, which was commissioned by government, was published in February 2017 and contained an outline plan for the social economic regeneration of Dublin's North Inner City area. In June 2017, Micheál Stone was appointed by government as independent chair of the North East Inner City Programme Implementation Board. Members of the board include representatives from relevant government departments and agencies, business and local community. The board is assisted by 5 subgroups. These are as follows: 1 tackling crime and drugs, another on education, training and employment, a 3rd on creating an integrated system of social services, the 4th improving the physical landscape, and 5th addiction treatment and rehabilitation services. The board and the subgroups continued to meet on a monthly basis to oversee and progress the implementation of the 54 actions set out in the Mulvey report. Officials from my department work closely with the board, the subgroups and the dedicated programme office. The chairman of the board reports to an oversight group of senior officials chaired by the Secretary General of my department. This group meets regularly and held its most recent meeting yesterday. The structure ensures strong and active participation by all relevant government departments and agencies and deals with any structural barriers or issues highlighted by the board. Cabinet Committee B, which I chair, provides the requisite ministerial oversight of the initiative and receives regular updates on recent progress and implementation of the Mulvey actions. I last met the chair of the board at the launch of PTEC in Larkin Community College on the 16th of November. The board recently published its 2018 annual progress report, and notable achievements include 50 new staff funded and recruited to enhance service delivery in childcare, youth work, elder care and physical environment projects, the completion of refurbishment works on the Lourdes Daycare Centre and the commencement of enabling works to Fitzgibbon Street Garda Station. 51 new Gardaí have been assigned to the area since last April, and the development of the PTEC initiative in 3 second-level schools in the area to link industry and education through mentorships and internships. Government is committed to supporting and investing in the North East Inner City community and ensuring that Micheál Stone and the board have the relevant resources to achieve their targets and fulfil their ambition. To this end, Government has made €6.5 million available in funding for the initiative in 2019. In terms of the ambition for 2019, the board intends to place an emphasis on ensuring that the longer-term interventions required to make fundamental and transformational change to the area are initiated and implemented. Central to the board's aims for 2019 are initiatives to improve assistance for families affected by addiction issues and drug-related intimidation, to build on relationships with local business and employers to create sustainable employment, and continued efforts to improve the physical and built environment to make the North East Inner City a better place to live and work.
Deputy Dessie Ellis.
Good, Taoiseach, notwithstanding the very good work being undertaken as part of the North East Inner City initiative, there are big problems in the North East Inner City, as we all know, similar to the issues in my own area that need to be addressed. There's been a big increase in illegal dumping in the area since the disastrous privatisation of bin collections. Antisocial behaviour is on the rise and gangs are openly selling drugs on street corners. There is also a big problem, not just in the inner city, but in many other areas of quads and scramblers being illegally driven around housing estates and green areas. I was disappointed a bill I brought to regulate these vehicles was voted down by this government and by Fianna Fáil. Residents are living in fear and there doesn't appear to be a strong guard of visibility. We have raised this lack of visibility with the Gardaí and the Minister, but given that there are 54 less Gardaí in the North Central area compared to a decade ago, then this is the consequence. That is something that must be corrected. Given the lack of affordable and social housing in the city, there's a growing culture of 2- and 3-family generations sharing single homes in overcrowded conditions. This is having a very negative impact on people's physical and mental health. on children's education and social development, and it's a big contributory factor in many of the problems in the North Inner City. We have to get to grips with the massive housing issues across the area and right across Dublin. There are also a lot of abandoned historical buildings in the inner city, which are major eyesores for residents and visitors. Buildings like Alborough House and the former Magdalen Laundry site on Sean McDermott Street.
Thank you, Deputy.
There's a lack of imagination and political will in terms of how these buildings could be developed and for the local community, as opposed to simply serving the interests of private developers.
Deputy Martin.
North East Inner City Group is welcome, but there remain serious issues concerning the level of resources it requires, and more importantly the lack of a coherent national local development agenda. There really isn't anywhere in the world where a once-off report on an area and an ongoing implementation of that report delivers sustained regeneration. What works actually is a systematic and ongoing process of local engagement, shared planning between state agencies and ongoing planning. Last month, Taoiseach Deputy John Curran asked the Minister to ring about why the government is refusing to adopt an approach of systematically targeting concentrated disadvantage. I mean, there's been a huge drop-off in that sort of coordinated approach that was there over a decade ago. And the reply he got actually was an example of a government which is mainly focused on the number of projects ministers can announce rather than having a real impact. The approach of distributing funding in a much broader way, devolving some to the local authorities and most into the hands of the Minister, has led directly to a reduction in the funding being given to the communities most in need. The joint planning approach of state services in disadvantaged communities has been pushed to the side as well. The spirit of RAPID has been well and truly buried. Will you agree, Taoiseach, to commission a short report into the impact of moving from development schemes focused on the most disadvantaged communities to one which is far more scattered? Surely you agree that the approach which you are praising for the North Inner City should be followed elsewhere? And before Christmas you promised to examine the issue of the increased politicisation of grants in a range of areas such as the arts, community development and research. Can you outline the result of your examination of this issue?
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Taoiseach, our local representative who's a resident in Constitution Hill flats in the North Inner City was forced recently to organise with the community in the area a protest, including a sit-down to Dublin City Council over rat infestations in Constitutional Hill flats, Queen Street flats, Dorset Street flats, Upper Dominic Street apartments. A 5-year-old child was bitten by a rat recently. I talked to Gillian this morning. I said, has your protest had any impact? Because there were promises from the council to address it. She said, no, you just have to walk outside my flats and you can see the rats continuing to infest the place. Now, I heard somebody who'd lived in Henrietta Street tenements the other day on the radio as part of the 100-year celebrations, talking about what Dublin was like then, and the biggest thing he described about the terrible things of living in the tenements 100 years ago were rats. And today we still have rat infestation, and the residents of these inner city communities have to go to the lengths of protesting at Dublin City Council, and still nothing is done. And they fear that that failure really to address that level of neglect in the area is linked to a possible agenda to drive the community out, essentially, to socially cleanse the area. Huge numbers of the Dominic Street, Dorset Street flats are lying empty. Brendan Kenny has talked recently about saying there will be no more public housing in the inner city. It'll all be going out to Coolock and Ballymun and so on. So their fear is that this neglect is deliberate, that the inner city communities are being run down, issues like rat infestation are not being addressed because actually the agenda is to destroy these communities and push them out. What are you going to do about that?
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. The North Inner City Initiative is one of the projects that has been greatly supported across this House. It was a really important initiative of your predecessor. But there are concerns. Joe Costello, I talk to very regularly about these matters, about the pace of investment. And I just want you to be clear that the additional allocation from 2 to 5.5 million that was announced with some fanfare in October will be spent, and the projects that are outlined for this year, 2019, will go ahead as planned. Can I ask when the community hub in Rutland Street School will be up and running specifically? Can I ask you, do you plan to put this initiative on a statutory basis? We've asked about that before, and I think that would give great reassurance to the local community. The plans to develop Aldborough House, are they going ahead? And one of the demands from the local community is that local labour would be involved in any refurbishment work there. Have you considered that, and will you consider that? And finally, one of the things I remember having discussions with the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny in relation to this really being a model, if we got it right, that we could replicate anywhere in other disadvantaged areas. Have you thought of expanding this particular initiative to other vulnerable or disadvantaged areas in the country?
4.5 minutes now to respond to this.
Ms. Corla, I'll pick up on a few of the questions that were asked. I know the Deputy's comments, but I'll respond to the questions. I think Deputy Ellis asked about the Magdalen laundry site, and as deputies will be aware, the City Council voted against the sale of the former convent and laundry at Sean McDermott Street. The proposed plans were for a hotel on the site and also social housing units designed for older persons. So it's not entirely correct to say that the council has no plans for social housing in this area. They actually did have plans, but they were voted down by the city councillors, at least in this particular instance, and that happens more and more, sadly, all over Dublin. And there was also plans for a suitable memorial for the Magdalen women, which would have brought investment and footfall to the area. There are, of course, a lot of understandable sensitivities around the site, given its former use, but I am hopeful that the land will be developed for the benefit of the area and the residents while respecting the difficult history of the location. Deputy Martin raised the issue of local community development, and I acknowledge he's raised this on many occasions in the past. There are a lot of ways that you can deliver local community development. My constituency has quite a number of pockets of deep disadvantage, as I know the Deputies does too. And sometimes it's done through vehicles like the local drugs task forces, the whole DESH programme in education, which I think most people acknowledge has improved education outcomes for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, CLAR in depopulated rural areas, and also using the LCDCs as the vehicle to deliver local community development. Whether the North East Inner City model is one that should be followed and replicated in the future, I think it's too soon to judge. I don't think anyone can question the excellent work that has been done by the task force and by the group in recent years. But ultimately, any appraisal has to be based on outcomes, and you'd have to take one or two similar areas around the country and compare the outcomes there with the outcomes in the North East Inner City to assess whether all of the good work and all of the investment has actually led to an improvement in measurable outcomes. And I think it'll take a couple of years before we can know that for sure. And we need to make a distinction, I think, between good work and good outcomes, because they can be quite different. In terms of the politicisation of government grants, I don't really accept that criticism. Any kind of grants that are announced by government, you have to apply for them. There's an appraisal and evaluation system, often a scoring system, and then the Minister announces the successful grantees. And then a flurry of freedom of information requests come in afterwards to make sure that there wasn't any political interference in them. So I'm sure that's not the case. I do remember one thing that I was very involved in as Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, working with Michael Ring, was changing the whole sports capital programme so that it was less political and that we had a proper scoring system, that each county got an amount of money relative to the number of people living in that county rather than where the Minister might be from. And those criteria have been retained for the Sports Capital Grant since by subsequent ministers. I'm very sorry to hear about the condition of some of the social housing around Dorset Street that Deputy Boyd Barrett mentions. I know that area quite well for lots of different reasons, but I really can't comment on what Dublin City Council's plans are. But suffice to say that Dublin City Council is a council that's now very much dominated by left-wing political forces. So I think if there's any attempt being made to run down the area, surely they should take some responsibility for their role in holding the City Council to account, especially if they're the majority on that particular council. On Arbor House, the last I heard was that the plans for Arbor House were to develop it for offices as a company HQ, thus bringing employment into the area. On the funding, I'm advised that for 2019, 6.5 million has been funded through the Community Enhancement Programme that was formerly RAPID and the Community Facilities Scheme. And in terms of the ambition for 2019, the Board intends to place an emphasis on ensuring that the long-term interventions required to make a fundamental and transformational change to the area are initiated and implemented. And central to the Board's aims for 2019 are to assist families affected by addiction and drug-related intimidation in particular, to build relationships with local businesses and employers to create sustainable employment, to continue efforts to improve the physical and built environment to make the North East Inner City a more attractive place for people to live and also to work.